MSNBC's Morning Joe and political analyst and former White House press secretary Jen Psaki had this to say about yesterday's House Twitter hearings and the Twitter files.
The problem also with these hearings are, you look at these issues, they never produce it. The Twitter files. You remember the Twitter files? Oh, boy, that was right. Like,
this is going to be the end.
It's fascinating that the Twitter files had such an extraordinary blind spot and ended up being the most biased thing I've ever seen in my life. Because we find out after the Twitter files come out, I guess Elon didn't give them all the information about, like, Twitter executives cowering in the corner and doing whatever Donald Trump wanted them to do. You've got the Twitter files. You've got the New York Post, the Hunter Biden laptop thing. These things have been looked at. It's just like when they were, you know, who was the special Durham. It's just like Durham. I'd read Durham's pleadings and I'd say, okay, there has to be something here. Yeah. And Meek will tell you, I read one pleading all day and I called about 30 legal experts. I go, what's here? And every one of them said, been reading it. I don't think anything's here. Conservatives keep doing this. They did it with Durham and their witch hunt against the FBI. They did it on Hunter Biden's laptop and their witch hunt against Twitter. They did it on the Twitter files and their witch hunt. Like, they only want to go after blue witches. They don't want to go after red witches. These things never, ever produce the punch they expect.
No, I mean, and to go back to Mike Markle's earlier point, I mean, this is like a word salad of right-wing craziness.
Incredible. Twitter files author Michael Shellenberger joins us now to weigh in on this and tell us what's coming next in the Twitter files. Michael, I assume you saw a lot of the hearing yesterday. In fact, you were tweeting about it, so I know you were watching. I think it's I get this reaction from the mainstream media. It's like they finally started paying attention to the Twitter files, and they only care now that there's some evidence that Donald Trump also abused his power to order Twitter to take down some dumb Chrissy Teigen comment. But they want to, so they only care that Donald Trump did it, and then they want to write off the rest of it as a nothing burger or whatever term he used.
Yeah, I was disappointed by the mainstream media's reaction. Not completely surprised. I thought that I think we've seen a lot of very uncomfortable engagements by the FBI, putting the pressure on Twitter to engage in censorship. I think we also saw a very disturbing pattern of behavior around the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop. We did learn yesterday that the head of trust and safety at Twitter, Yoel Roth, was indeed overruled in his assessment that the laptop was legitimate and real by his superiors. We know that we had documented that Jim Baker, the former FBI general counsel, had been really the main person inside Twitter demanding that the tweets be censored. It was a funny event. I mean, I think there was a few interesting things out of it. I mean, Jim Baker, the person that I've been most critical of, actually made a good suggestion, which is that the government ought to restrict how much FBI agents and other government officials are out there pressuring social media companies. For me, the whole thing made a very strong case for transparency. We just need to, if you're going to have this special right, which is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which gives this huge liability protection to social media companies, then they need to be transparent about how they're doing content moderation. I thought the other interesting thing was just when Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had a chance to speak, she was actually demanding more censorship by Twitter, particularly of libs of TikTok, around a controversy I think is very interesting, but basically one that, in my view, is a classic case of something where the solution is more speech, not censorship. I was also happy to see, because again, these things are not easily definable. Cori Bush, who's a very progressive Democrat, raising concerns about the excess of power in the hands of the social media companies. That's a view I strongly share. I don't think that this is an issue that fits easily on left and right. I think I personally have become more sympathetic to the libertarian point of view. I never thought of myself as libertarian, but I do increasingly view restrictions on freedom of speech as very dangerous and should be incredibly limited. And that this constant government pressure on the social media companies, it remains a huge problem, one that can only be solved, I think, through transparency.
Michael, what's so interesting about this I think you're right. Obviously, it's the case that the mainstream media is only interested in the Twitter files now because they can score some points. And the way that they're scoring points is to say, okay, the Twitter files has been painted as a kind of social media-backed attack on the right wing. Social media companies are biased for the left and liberals, and they censored to hurt Trump and suppress this Hunter Biden story that was going to hurt Joe Biden potentially in the 2020 election. Now that there's evidence that there is more in the way of the Trump administration trying to leverage its power to suppress on Twitter, now they're suddenly interested. Okay, fair enough. I also think that Matt Taibbi, who's pushed back and said, well, I did report that there were requests that came from the Trump administration initially in the first Twitter files, so this is nothing new. I think that's also legitimate. However, I think this is something that we've discussed here on the show, that the way that the Twitter files has been framed by some, I think, some of the journalists who have been reporting on the Twitter files, some people who are not the journalists, but other folks in the community, have really pushed that particular framing, that this isn't just about government using its power on the social media companies to censor, which is a general general story that I think would appeal to many, but specifically the government has been using its power to hurt the right. That being the case, do you think, in retrospect, there would be some value? There would have been some value, and going forward, there would be some value in having a more comprehensive review of the files, having more inquiry into whether or not certain files that are inconvenient to the narrative that the right is being targeted here are actually being disclosed, and for a more ideologically diverse group of journalists to be privy to those documents, because I do think the reporting that is coming out of here is so important.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I would love to see more journalists involved in the Twitter files. I was constantly, I mean, I was invited in by a journalist. I was not invited in by Elon Musk. I was invited in by my friend Barry Weiss. We then, made the case to bring in Lee Fong, who's from The Intercept. I don't think anybody would consider him a conservative. My colleague Leighton Woodhouse. Actually, most of us, I think, except for Barry, who maybe has been more on the center for longer. Most of us do come from the left. And as you pointed out, I mean, Matt did point out those instances where the Trump administration was asking for censorship. I had never none of us had heard of the Chrissy Teigen demand by President Trump. Are you kidding me? We would have loved to have reported on that. We didn't find that. We certainly would have reported that. You may also remember that Ro Khanna, the Democratic member of Congress from Silicon Valley, played an important role in pushing back against Twitter executives, Vijay Gadde in particular, expressing concern about the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop. So you have and he came off, and that was, I believe, in Matt Taibbi's first or second thread. So we certainly never wanted to portray this as a partisan issue at all. I do think it's also the case that most of the disfavored voices were on the right, but I don't think it was exclusively that way, and I think there's various reasons for that. I also think some of this is a little bit hard to classify, since it does have to do more less on a left-right spectrum and maybe more on a kind of libertarian versus more restrictive kind of view of things. But yeah, I mean, look, I would love to see all the Twitter files released. I'm not the owner of Twitter. Sometimes, I'll encourage things of Elon, and obviously a lot of people are lobbying him to do various things. I hope that's the direction this goes
I think
in.
that right there is the concern. It's not any of your guys' fault, I think. It's pretty clear. But as Elon Musk is the one who's basically in control of the trove and who gets what and who sees what. I mean, Matt was asked by people yesterday why he didn't report on all of the Trump requests. And his answer was that he didn't see those requests. He didn't have that information. He says, yeah. I was, however, told by sources that there had been requests from the Trump White House, which I reported, but I didn't have the actual text. So people are asking, okay, well, you were told that this information existed, but it wasn't disclosed to you. Why? Were decisions being made not by y'all, it's not your fault, but by people at Twitter, by Elon Musk, to disclose certain kinds of files that got thorough reporting to you all, but not disclose files that would paint a different kind of political narrative? And is there some responsibility, then the follow-up question, is there some responsibility on the journalist to have interrogated what documents they were being shown and whether or not they were being used in this way by Twitter and Elon Musk, who have different interests than investigative journalists who are going through these documents?
Yeah, I mean, just first of all, Elon never suggested a single search for any of us, or I should say for myself and everybody I know. I never heard of him making a request. We never had any requests denied. And I should say, I've read all the threads more than once as carefully as I can so I can speak to them. But my focus was on the January 6th, the post-January 6th decision to deplatform President Trump, and also on the Hunter Biden laptop. I also assisted on some of the visibility filtering, as they called shadow banning. And so that was not coming from Elon at all. It's more just an issue of, and that's why I say I think most of the censorship was directed more towards conservatives. I think that's just what was going on. I did read the Rolling Stone article that came out yesterday that used the word database of Republicans. I mean, we never saw anything in any. I'm very skeptical that I never heard anybody talk like that about a database of Republicans. That sounded like, I think that was a quote from an anonymous source in the article.
Yeah, that's why I prefer to just talk about what Matt has said. I mean, Matt has said, this is the issue. He says that he knew that there was some document existed. There was some evidence that Trump had made these requests, and he reported on it, rightfully so. Complete credit where credit's due. But that he was not given those documents. So that now we're living in a world where we have knowledge that there is some document that looks bad for the Trump administration, frankly, behaving in the same way that the Biden administration and liberals have behaved, but that those documents haven't been disclosed. And does that raise any red flags? It's not that Elon Musk is sitting there personally striking out, redacting documents.
Well, and let me add to that.
But what choices are being made?
What I'd love to see, Michael, and maybe this would make for a good subsequent Twitter files, is the nature of the so I think it's improper for political officials, government employees, to be having this level of communication to the companies, regardless of what it is. But if the Republican requests are substantially of a nature, and it was almost acknowledged somewhat quietly in that Rolling Stone article, that the nature of the Republican request more often is, why did you take this thing down? If the FBI employees and the CDC employees and the Biden White House employees are all saying take down content, and the Republicans are meekly objecting, I might still say I don't think Republicans should be talking to Twitter that way, but it would be almost of a different nature. So that would be, would that be something to explore in a future release? It would be helpful to know what the characteristic of Republican and Trump-esque overtures to Twitter is as well.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm glad you mentioned that. We definitely saw a lot of that, and I did tweet out yesterday the Twitter document showing that they had put a aggressive visibility filter, I believe that's the exact language, on Congressperson Lauren Boebert, and then also we saw in the testimony that Yoel Roth said that they did not inform people, including members of Congress, if they were getting these aggressive visibility filters. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm actually not familiar with what Matt said, but I'm very confident that if anybody found those documents of Trump or Republicans demanding censorship, we would definitely love to put that out there. We're just, very interested journalists, very interested in covering this. I personally am an independent. I think most people are independents. We're just trying to kind of read it for what we saw. And the way that we did the searches was oriented around things that we knew were big issues for the company going in, because you had to have something specific to focus on. You couldn't just, be like, we want every email or document from 2020 or 2021. It just would be too overwhelming. But I do think there's much more work to do. And I will say, I think when you're in a situation where we see a lot of abuse of power, the underlying cause is somebody's got too much power. And we have, our founding fathers, who I've appreciated as I've gotten older a little bit more, they understood that you need counteracting powers to that. And I think they also understood, and the courts have understood, that you need transparency. So for me, I hope that this conversation evolves to a place where you could get people like Cori Bush and Lauren Boebert to actually agree on the need for making transparency a requirement for having Section 230 privileges.
Well, we have to leave it there, but it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on to talk to us more about this, Michael.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And we'll have more Rising right after these messages.